In this video, I'll look at bounce lighting in a scene using Mental Ray and the practical lighting I put in the previous lesson. The first thing I always want to do when I'm adjusting lighting is get the exposure node on the camera, at least having it there to tone map and govern the image before I start playing with lights too much. I'll select my camera, and into the lens shader in the Mental Ray section, I'll add on an MIA exposure photographic, or the photographic exposure node. For interiors, I'm going to run an ISO of 200, and I'll slow down the shutter to 24, or 1/24th of a second, and open up the f-stop. Now, what we knew from the previous lesson is that these lights blew out the floor, just burned it out because they were so bright. Once we get that exposure on, and using a spotlight with the area light function checked in Mental Ray, we get a much dimmer image, and we can really push the lights around nicely. As we can see in the IPR image, what was a very bright scene is now considerably darker with that exposure on. I also can play with the bounce light, as all I've done right now is turn it on. Here's how I'll adjust things. I'll go in the render settings and down to the final gather section. There's a couple of things to play with, and there's not really a right order to it as much as getting the look right. I like to put my secondary diffuse bounces up at 2. It gives a little more lift to the scene. We can crank that number higher if we go into the quality settings and increase the number of ray trace bounces. Additionally, I like to smooth out the final gather points using the point interpolation. This will take the final gather points and smooth them or interpolate between points to take out some of the blotchiness. This will already get me a brighter rendering. Now I still need to brighten up my lights, but there's one more thing I'll do in here. The primary diffuse scale controls the contribution of that final gather to the lighting. If we'd like to really make a rich, well-lit look, we can overcrank the value of that. I'll put mine up to 1.5 and see how it looks. Now I'm going to get a greater bounce light in the scene, not a more accurate one, because I haven't raised the accuracy in the final gather. But I'll get more bounce light contribution and hopefully light up more of the ceiling. I'll test out the render and see what it looks like. One other note here, on the quality, I usually like to change over my anti-aliasing, and this is a personal preference more than anything. Switching away from adaptive to custom, and making the minimum sample level 0 and the maximum 1. I'll use the box blur in here. This means every pixel in the image gets at least one sample of anti-aliasing, and takes out most of the jaggedness. Kind of a C+ grade all round, but nice and fast for testing. I'll IPR this image and see what it looks like. With my IPR done, I can see my image is still dim. I've cranked up the bounce light pretty nicely, and I just need to bring more light in the scene. I'll stop the IPR and pull up my outliner and select my lights. On the outliner, choosing Window and Outliner to access it, we can sort. In this case, what I've done is to choose Show Objects Lights, and that way I only see the lights in my scene. Since these spotlights are all like lights, I can adjust them all at once in the channel box. With my lights selected, I'll press Ctrl-A to go to the channel box, and in the channel box under the Shape node, I'll adjust that light. I'll scroll down and open up Spotlight Shape 9, which is actually all my lights here. I'll bring up the intensity. I'll try 10 and see how it looks. Now as you can see behind my IPR, my view has blown out. There's a limit to what I can show, even in Viewport 2.0, just I have so many lights it's maxing out the graphics card. I'll switch back to the default quality and press 6 to go back to the regular lighting. Now I'll render the image and see if I'm any closer, and see how the bounce light looks. With the rendering completed, I can see that an increase in the light intensity and the bounce light I've got is working really nicely. The light is coming down from the fixtures, hitting the floor, bouncing up, casting on the ceiling, showing all the contours, and even lighting up the eco. They're ready for maybe an additional light to really perk them up. one of the things I really need to do, besides lighting, is get accurate materials on, using mental ray materials with mental ray lights to get the reflectance and transmittance working correctly, so I can judge the bounce light. But this is a pretty good start. Increasing the primary diffuse scale and secondary bounces in the final gather, and cranking up the intensity of the light, combined with photographic exposure, gets me very nice, subtle, soft lighting in a scene with a minimum of lights and fairly reasonable render time.